Welcome to the Fantasy Forecheck, brought to you by the all-new Ram 1500 Sport. I'm Andy McNamara, along with the mustache-less Nick Alberga. R.I.P. Nick. That was a sweet stash. It's over now, though.
Sad times, like the weather outside. Very cold on my upper lip. Yes.
Very cold, but we're going to have the hot takes for you here on the show. Waiver wire pickups. We're going to have revenge games, and this has been a big thing of yours over the last several months. Revenge games, why that's important, and we're also going to tell you how you can win some cold, hard cash, baby, in the Ram Sportsnet Fantasy Hockey Pool a little bit later on. But Nick, let's get to some of the big stories of the week. And Taylor Hall, New Jersey, open to dealing him. What are the fantasy implications of that?
Yep, those are the whispers out of New Jersey, and as the losses continue to pile up there, certainly from a fantasy perspective, if you own Taylor Hall or if you're after Taylor Hall in the trade market, I think you want to keep in mind what's to happen down the stretch here. I think Ray Shero, the GM, is going to downplay and sort of slow play it, should I say, when it comes to Taylor Hall and sort of the direction. But I think, quite frankly, it's inevitable that Taylor Hall is dealt by the trade deadline. I just don't get the sense he wants to be a New Jersey Devil past July 1 when he becomes a UFA. So certainly the fantasy impact, that should be very meaningful to watch out for, because I think clearly he wants to go to a contender. Whoever's buying Taylor Hall has the ability maybe to re-sign him as well, but I think he's going to go to a top-notch team here.
Now, Nick, we get to emerging sellers. You mentioned Taylor Hall maybe being traded. Start of December, teams are starting to figure out who they are. Players, we're seeing what they are or are not when it comes to fantasy. Who are some sellers?
You're right, and especially in the NHL world, we always like to identify American Thanksgiving as a day that you want to be in a playoff spot. Clearly, New Jersey isn't. We can start there and go off New Jersey and what's happening there. I mean, if you're trading Taylor Hall, it means you're a seller. So I wonder about names like Wayne Simmons, who's on a one-year deal, Sami Vatanen, the defenseman's on a contract here, and also Kyle Palmieri, who's very valuable and I think is a hot commodity if he's put out there in the trade market. Is 1 year left after this one at a very favorable contract as well. So look out for that. I think you also want to look at Detroit, Los Angeles, and Ottawa, respectively.
Sure.
I tried my best to pull somebody out of Detroit that would be fantasy relevant. It's Jonathan Bernier. We'll see.
You found one.
Yeah, sort of. But I think in LA and Ottawa, respectively, there are two names that intrigue me a lot right now. That's Tyler Toffoli, contract year Toffoli, I like to call him. He's been up and down so far. I think he can add a boost to a potential suitor. I think maybe at Boston, maybe in Edmonton. You put him in a top 6 setting with the right players and new life on a new team. I think Toffoli could go off. And clearly your guy, Jean-Gabriel Pageau with the Ottawa Senators. It just continues. I think he makes it. You know, I honestly think Pageau's value is going to dip, obviously. But I think a contending team will pick him up to be a third-line center, and that could prove to be very valuable in reality, not so much in the fantasy world. Andy.
Would you look at trying to sell, if you're a Pageau owner, trying to trade him in your fantasy pool while the getting's good?
Yes, in general in Ottawa. I talked about this in my 20 fantasy thoughts last week, that Ottawa, this has been fine and dandy, but they're going to come back to reality. Anders Nielsen, JG Pageau. I think actually it's right now a good time to buy low on Thomas Chabot. Brady Tkachuk up front, I think has had his growing pains so far this season, but I think you're totally right. Like, especially when it comes to Pageau, I'm getting out as quickly as possible. I endorsed this. Yeah, I endorsed this last year when it came to Ryan Dzingel. It's the same type of situation with Ryan Dzingel and then JG Pageau, where Pageau is going to go to a new team and he's going to play more down the lineup, more so where he's better suited at this point.
Injury replacements, Nick. This is where, during a fantasy season, it can make or break your fantasy year. It really can. How you pick up off the waiver wire, who's from within. What are some injury replacements that we're seeing right now?
Shout out to producer, first and foremost, Drew Livingston, because he is going nuts. He was fired up about Mikko Rantanen coming back to the Avalanche lineup, and Jonas Donskoi. That is the guy I'm targeting right now, although I get it. Mikko Rantanen's back. Gabe Landeskog, the captain, slated to come back, I believe, on Wednesday against the Maple Leafs in a revenge game for Nazem Kadri.
Little tease.
Yes, little tease right there. But Donskoi right now under 20% ownership, and as long as he plays in that top line for how many games it is, you got to pick him up. Had 2 goals and 2 assists back in a 7-3 win against Chicago on Saturday night. Absolute value. Concussions have been running rampant again in the NHL through the past week. Rasmus Dahlin, that Eric Chernak hit with Tampa, he's out right now. I think for replacements when you come to Rasmus Dahlin, Adam Fox, Neil Pionk, Alex Goligoski. Same suspects we talked about on the back end for most of this season. Mika Zibanejad's back for the New York Rangers. I think that adds value in the top line for New York because they're keeping Strome and Panarin together right now. But Brendan Lemieux, 9% ownership, and Pavel Buchnevich, I think, is relevant now, clearly with Zibanejad back in the lineup. Not to mention Zibanejad, just 2 points in the Sportsnet Fantasy Hockey Pool, which we'll talk about
Nice
momentarily.
value, yeah.
Great value. And then you look in between the pipes as well. Devin Dubnyk continues to be out due to personal issues. I think if you're in need of a goaltender, maybe you look at an Alex Stalock. Quietly, I will say, too, when at the time of recording this, Minnesota 5-0-3 over the last 8 games, Andy.
Nick, one of the strategies we always look at on the show is which players play the most. It might sound simple, but if you track the schedule, you can have the most success. Good players play more. Check. You're gonna get more fantasy points.
Numbers.
9 teams. We'll put it up on the screen here. 9 teams have 4 games this week. 4 have 2, and there are 0 1-game teams on this one. So you keep track of that when you're making your lineups.
Chicago, Brandon Saad and Kirby Dach come to mind there in terms of ownership. Clearly in the Sportsnet Fantasy Hockey Pool, you're looking at guys like Patrick Kane,
Sure.
Alex DeBrincat. I wonder about the goaltending situation there. Maybe you go to Robin Lehner. LA's another team. Tyler Toffoli, as I just mentioned, comes to mind. Dustin Brown on that top line. Maybe you look at Kopitar and Doughty in the Sportsnet Fantasy Hockey Pool. And the New York Rangers, Buchnevich, Brendan Lemieux, as you know, reference to Adam Fox in the back end, 23% ownership. And Artemi Panarin, you can't go away from him right now. He's been money in the bank for the New York Rangers so far, and worth every penny to this point, I would argue.
But let's get to it. I've been looking forward to this. Revenge games. Revenge. And this is a real thing. You've been tracking this. Players going up against their former clubs perform better. And it's not just they're mad. This is true. You've been tracking this for a while.
It's sort of funny that we start doing sort of this segment on the show this week because it's a very fascinating week. You got Nazem Kadri coming back to Scotiabank Arena as Colorado visits Toronto on Wednesday night. Even some Anders Nielsen revenge. The Ottawa Senator renewed lease on life. Vancouver just dealing him off to Ottawa last year. Has one last shot to be an NHL goalie, and he's been marvelous.
Been really good.
For great spurts of time as an Ottawa Senator. Phil Kessel, I can't wait for this one. Phil Kessel returning to Pittsburgh and PPG Paints Arena, and the revenge of playing Evgeny Malkin and the team he won 2 Stanley Cups with.
He needs some sort of boost because this season has been wretched for Phil.
He's like minus $1 billion, and that's just beginning things. Just 4 goals, 10 assists for Phil Kessel. And
lowest goal total on pace for Nick since his rookie year.
Yeah, I
it's
don't
gross.
buy it. Like, it's a long season,
It's a long
right? And I think as a fantasy owner, you have to temper expectations, and you have to understand that it is Phil Kessel. He'll get going eventually, at least in my
He's
opinion.
streaky by nature. That's what he
Very
does.
streaky. He's a goal scorer, and the best of them are very, very streaky. Unless your name's Alex Ovechkin, you score 45, 50 a year with relative ease. Nick Schmaltz is returning to Chicago for the first time. Of course, part of that Strome deal last year. Had a season-ending surgery, so missed his return to Chicago. He'll get it this time. And last but not least, maybe get some Buffalo guys going on your roster for Sunday, because Ralph Kruger, we know by now what happened in Edmonton. He returns there to the scene of the crime like 5, 6, 7 years later. But it's still revenge in my mind. And I think just to add, I think when you look at the revenge narrative, you can find some extra value, some extra motives when it comes to players. And I think they're going to produce for these respective teams in their returns.
All right, Nick, now it's time, baby. It's time to win your share of $50,000, weekly $1,000 prizes, and a chance to win one of those brand spanking new Ram 1500 Sports in the Ram Sportsnet Fantasy Hockey Pool. And that's what the show, the Fantasy Forecheck, is brought to you by. The Canadian exclusive Ram 1500 Sport. This full-size pickup gives Canadians exceptional capability under the hood, advanced technology inside, and impeccable styling throughout. It's the Ram 1500 Sport, and it's designed for life in the North. So if you're new to the pool, this is the great thing about the Fantasy Hockey Pool. You can jump in at any point during the season. So what you have to do is get 6 forwards, 4 defensemen, 2 goalies, and you have 30 points to spend to fill out that lineup. They are numbered 1 through 4. And then you slap a Ram-capable tag on each position group. 1 forward, 1 defender, 1 goaltender. You double your points. So the strategy, Nick, that we usually look at is, well, real good players who get a lot of points. Double it up.
Yeah, and for my pick, we'll start at forward. We'll stick with the theme of the program this week, and that is Taylor Hall. That is the biggest news in the NHL world as we continue to see the developments over the next couple months. So I'm going to go with Taylor Hall. He's worth 3 points, what I think is a bargain. 4 goals on 85 shots. That has to change, and who knows how much the pressure is getting to Taylor Hall, because I think in general he looks rather tense just playing the game. But let's not forget, he's like a year and a half removed from a Hart Trophy. This guy is dynamic, to say the least. I think he's going to be huge elsewhere by the deadline, as we mentioned. But it's inevitable. Like, Taylor Hall is going to find his groove at some point in time, and for my sake and the Sportsnet fantasy hockey pool on my roster, I hope it happens this weekend.
Right. And Nick, I'm going to go in a similar vein here, but I'm going to add some value to it as well. 2 points in the fantasy hockey pool for Patrik Laine. Not the start to the year that he wanted, but he has got double-digit fantasy points, so he has been finding that groove. Double-digit fantasy points in 5 of his last 6 games. We know the talent level of Patrik Laine. He's an absolute stud. And 3 goals, 4 assists over that stretch before Saturday. Streaky, but he's on one of those good streaks, so I'm going to slap that capable tag on.
I like that, and very under the radar, I might add the Winnipeg Jets. Connor Hellebuck's been an exceptional story,
Sure.
but Patrik Laine has had a nice little tidy bounce-back season. Even a guy like Blake Wheeler, I expect him to get going eventually, the captain of the Winnipeg Jets, and I'm good with that pick. I like that quite a bit. Back end, Erik Karlsson, a so-so start. Slow by his standards,
Right.
which, I mean, happens a lot. It happened last year. He's really started to cook. 5 points in the last 4 games. Erik Karlsson, like, you know where he's going to finish up. If he's healthy, he's going to be around, the point per game pace, or 70 points at least. So I think he's due for a hot streak. It's starting to happen, so I'm going to go with Erik Karlsson as my Ram-capable pick on the back end.
For my defender, and this is going to be able to translate into your season-long fantasy pool as well, I like Adam Fox of the New York Rangers. Now, 23% ownership in Yahoo leagues, but for the Ram Sportsnet fantasy hockey pool side of things, I like it 4-game week, right? We like the most opportunity. And when you look at Fox, he is one of those guys that contributes in all fantasy categories. He can block shots, hits if that counts in your league, right? He's going to pick up some points as well. And when you look at what Fox has been able to do on the multiple shot standpoint in each of the game as well, has points in 6 of his last 7, and you couple in that 4-game week, I'll slap the tag on him.
I just scooped him up in one of my leagues as well.
There you go.
In terms of a streamer play, you can't go wrong with Adam Fox. That Ranger back end in general, I think David Quinn's done an exceptional
been
job,
real good.
and they're much improved. There's no doubt about that. In between the pipes, Andy, I'm going to go with Semyon Varlamov of the New York Islanders, a team that never gets any respect still. For what they're doing defensively and their goaltending tandem. Thomas Greiss gets hurt, the veteran, on Saturday night, which means Semyon Varlamov's going to see all the starts, and we don't know the extent of the injury thus far when it comes to Greiss. But you look at Varlamov's numbers, they speak for themselves. 10-2-0, 2.10, and a 931 save percentage. He's going to see a lot of action, especially in this 4-game week for the Islanders.
My goalie, I'm going Philadelphia. And I actually had a little trouble thinking, which one should I pick, right? Carter Hart or Brian Elliott. I like Elliott more for the DFS side.
Yep.
So I'll put the Ram-capable tag on Carter Hart. And you look at just the hot streak. That Philly, red hot. He's allowed only 4 goals over his last 3 starts, 2.44 goals against over 17 games he's played this season. They're on a tear. The goaltending tandem is, I'm going to put it on Elliott.
You know what's remarkable is, like, Alain Vigneault never gets the respect I think he's owed. Anywhere he's coached, he's been tremendous. It continues here with Philadelphia, now 14-7-5. Shane Gostisbehere is a work in progress. I wonder if he becomes a trade candidate for this team going forward. Ivan Provorov, an absolute stallion on the back end. Kevin Hayes, I think, is surprised to an extent considering that contract, but that's a scary, scary team to play right now. And the Maple Leafs are in Philadelphia on Tuesday night.
Right.
The wins are starting to pile up for the Philadelphia Flyers, and you talk about bounce-back teams. Alain Vigneault's done a tremendous job, Andy.
And if you want any help with your fantasy hockey pool, try to rack up those wins in your season. Hey, we're here to help. Any fantasy hockey questions, get us on Twitter at AndyMCD1, at the Golden Muzzy. And good luck in the Ram Sportsnet Fantasy Hockey Pool. You've been watching the Fantasy Forecheck. Have a good week.